We would like to remind the viewers that Election Day is Saturday, May 12th. In addition, early voting runs from April 30th to May 8th.
So welcome Place 5 candidates.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Candidate Dominic Chavez had a scheduling conflict, and Tina Cannon responded to the questionnaire after invitations had been sent and the schedule had been made. John Rubin and David Conley did not respond to our questionnaire. We will begin with 1-minute opening statements for each candidate.
John Duffy.
Hi, my name is John Duffy. I am a self-professed green anarchist, so I guess I'm kind of good on the green part here, the anarchy part, probably not. But I typically involve myself primarily in activism, not in politics. I think direct action typically has a better result than miring oneself in the in representative politics. Currently, I'm out on bond for an action I took in Houston. I blockaded the entrance to the port of Houston. Children who are raised in the area around the port are 56% more likely to develop leukemia due to the chemical plants that are there. And I find it awkward that we live in a society where it's considered the right, if you're doing something for money, to give people cancer, to kill people, to destroy an ecosystem. But if you simply just put your body between the people who do those things and the machinations of them, the police come out not to help you stop the killers, but to stop you. So anyway, I'm running basically on the concept of sustainability and hoping to make Austin a place that is sustainable in the future.
Thank you. Robert Bo Prudente.
Thank you. I am R.A. Bo Prudente. Been in Texas all my life, native Texan, and I appreciate this opportunity to be here. Why am I running for city council? Well, I've never ran before. It's an experience, but I have ideas. I don't have answers. I have ideas, suggestions that I can put forth that maybe these suggestions haven't been addressed, or there's issues that need to be addressed, and I have suggestions. There you go. Now, as far as the eco and the ecology of Austin and everywhere else, I'm from a place in East Texas called Lufkin, in that area. I was up there, and it was beautiful, pine forest everywhere you go. Well, I left for a few years and went back to visit about 8 years later. Clear cut, concrete, roads, destruction of the environment. That's the way I see it. Coming here and after looking at that and realizing what our environment is coming to makes me think, well, we have got to do one of two things: straighten it out or suffer the consequences. My main issue is water. Water is the structure that upholds everything else. Without it, there is nothing. So that is my issue, water, and I have some more on it later. Thank you.
Okay. And incumbent for Place 5, Bill Spellman.
Thanks, Reed. I'm Bill Spellman. I'm the guy these two fellows and 4 other people who aren't here are all running against. I've been here before. I was on the city council between 1997 and 2000, and I remember not too fondly the debates we had in the late 1990s about the environmental problems we were all facing then. The biggest environmental problem in the late 1990s was an ongoing war between the environmental community and the development community fought over the Edwards Aquifer. And the critical issue is, would we be able to save Barton Springs? That problem hasn't been completely solved yet, but it is largely mitigated. We don't have the same level of combat over developments in Southwest Austin as we used to, and our environmental problems have morphed, but they're no less serious than they were in the 1990s. Now we're talking about air quality. Finally, sooner or later we're going to be in violation of EPA standards when they finally get around to changing those standards. I'm sure they will someday. We're still got water quality problems with erosion, with flood controls on our urban creeks, and we have a tremendous problem of urban sprawl. And I think that's the biggest problem facing us right now is what are we going to do with the 500,000 people or so who are going to be coming to Austin over the next few years? Are they going to be living inside the city, or are they going to be living way out in the suburbs where we can't get, where they're going to be screwing up our environment? I look forward to saying more about that.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. Each of you answered our candidate questionnaire, and the questions tonight were written to illuminate the answers that you gave. We'll move on. We'll move from the audience left to right, and so we'll begin with you, Councilmember Spellman. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each of the questions. Mr. Prudente says that he supports using municipal solid waste as an energy source. The city's zero waste master plan explicitly calls for no incineration. What will you do to promote and prevent so-called waste to energy programs in Austin?
Well, I certainly won't promote them. I remember one of the first arguments that I saw the city getting itself into when I first came to town in the late 1980s was whether to build an incinerator for use as a public power source. And I remember thinking it was a very odd debate to be having in a city that thought of itself as a green city, because I can't imagine how incineration would be a clean source of energy. Now, we've had some more discussions about that, and I understand how biomass out in the area around Lufkin or Nacogdoches could conceivably be a clean energy source. But I certainly don't think trash is likely to be anywhere near as clean as the stuff that we're scraping off of the forests after somebody's cut down some trees. It seems to me the right way to think about this is, what can we reuse? What can we recycle? Are there other ways of putting our used up resources to work rather than as just burning them and trying to turn them into heat energy? I think there's a lot of ways we can do that. I don't think we can get to zero waste. I don't think that's humanly possible, but we can certainly get to the point where we're recycling or reusing the vast majority of the things that we use, things that we own, and I think we're definitely headed in that direction.
Okay. And Mr. Prudente, what will you do to promote or prevent incineration?
Well, as it stands, we are fighting fossil fuels and coal. We're trying to eliminate both of those. So we're pushing towards solar energy and wind energy, and they're awful expensive. We are getting trash from people who's paying the city of Austin to get rid of it, and from here, the recycle, I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I know there's quite a bit of this municipal waste going to landfills. So we have a problem with landfills. Now there's pollution right there. Now the talk is by 2030 to be zero waste, all recycled. That's 18 years from now. This has been going on. This talk has been going on for years. Is that going to come about? Well, we could get rid of this waste and not pollute the air, because there's this item called electrostatic precipitator that zaps particulate matter. There's another device that collects emissions, the gases, and recycles them, so there's less than 5% of the emissions that actually enter the atmosphere. So with our problem of energy, this is a freebie, you might say, because it's not going to landfill, and we're getting paid to pick it up by the people who are in the city of Austin. So yes, I look at this as one way of producing energy, and at the same time we are doing some recycling, like the gases, for instance. The melted particles that are collected in ingots are later recycled into building materials such as countertops, certain types of walls. So there's a lot to look at here that's very beneficial.
Okay, and Mr. Duffy, what will you do to promote or prevent incineration?
I'm not into incineration. Every female mammal on planet Earth has dioxin in her breast milk, and this amount increases every year. And this includes Eskimo and Inuit women, and also, polar bears, creatures that live far from human civilization. And a lot of this is due to the incineration of waste. But we do have this question before us of, how are we going to power our cities if we consider electric power, a God-given right? And as it stands now, we don't have a lot of other clean options. Like right now, we use the Fayette coal plant for part of our energy, and burning coal releases mercury into the atmosphere, releases it into the water. And then we also have these policies where we look at population growth and the growth of the city and the growth of the city economy as not only inevitable, but necessary and requiring promotion. So we have this population of roughly 800,000 people in the city right now, and we're just kind of saying, well, it's inevitable that we'll have 1.6 million people in 20 years, and then 3.2 million people 20 years after that, and how are we going to give all these people energy? At some point, we have to find some solution that doesn't put at risk every other life form on the planet, so we can have TVs and jazzy gizmos.
Okay.
All right, this time we will begin with Mr. Prudente. The second question for each of you concerns sustainable food. Both you and Mr. Duffy suggest that Austin needs to have more food grown in the city limits. What would you do to encourage more food production in Austin?
Well, we already have certain people, there's greenhouses around Austin. That's not the answer. I see from a while back, our farms have disappeared and have been replaced with development. There's your biggest problem right there. People that have land are not utilizing that land. It's valuable. And the land has been rezoned for commercial purposes in many instances. Best thing that I can suggest far as sustainable foods is let's get on the bandwagon and push people backyard gardening, greenhouses, hotbeds. There's a limited amount of space in your yard that you can do this, but there's space. Condominiums, no, you can't do it. Apartments, no. Homeowners, yes. And anybody that may have access to these community gardens. That's the best way I can see it at this present time.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy, what would you do to encourage more food production inside the city of Austin proper?
I wish I could talk about this for hours on end. I grow food at my own house. I grow probably on a quarter of an acre right now myself. I've started many gardens around the city. I've assisted in starting some on public land that got destroyed, and just today I was building a garden at Flipnotics, which I'm donating with other members of Occupy Austin to the coffee house there. For every 1 calorie of food consumed in the West, 10 calories of petroleum energy are burned. The average piece of food travels 1,500 miles before it hits our plate. In the past, Austin was fed by a lot of small farms on the east side. The bottomland on the Colorado River, off the Colorado River, there is extremely fertile. When you dam rivers, unfortunately, you stop the flood process, you stop the bringing of all those nutrients to that land, but it's still a fairly fertile place. I think there's another great conundrum in our society, which is that unemployment is extremely high, especially for young people. In the sort of 18 to 25 range, you have an unemployment rate of roughly 20%, depending on whose statistics you look at. And the average age of a farmer in this country is like 60, 65, they're all retiring. Now, getting young people into growing food it seems like the biggest no-brainer. Like, you don't have work, we need people to replace the people who are retiring. But the problem is land costs. They don't have anywhere to grow it. I think a lot of young people would love to do that instead of working a deep fry basket. So we have to get them the land. And we have a lot of land that's underused that the city could be ceding to co-ops and to groups of young people and people all around the city in the different vicinities to turn into organic permaculture farms that are low water usage, that are going to be compatible with the drought cycles here as well.
Mr. Spellman, what would you do to encourage more local food production?
I think the critical issues, I think these are both really good suggestions, and I really look forward to being able to do some stuff with them. I think the critical issues these guys have identified is land and water. Land is a problem, of course, because we're sprawling so quickly that a lot of good farmland is being eaten up in development. And the reason it's being eaten up in development is because we're growing quickly, over which we have almost no control, and also because we are not taking charge of where that growth is going, and therefore it's seeking the lowest common denominator. The easiest place to grow is in green fields, mostly northwest and south of town. So we have a lot more people moving in Manor and Buda, in points east, which have before this been really good cropland. So it's harder and harder to grow stuff in the Austin metropolitan area. We can encourage gardening in town, in part by making it easier for people to live in town. If we had more spaces in the east side where it was good cropland, we could create some community gardens in the east side of Austin, and give people access to them. We've also got a really well documented series of community gardens in town. What we need to do is make it cheaper and easier for people to do that. And part of that is to provide access to water, which currently is fairly expensive and can be made more cheaply, and also give people access to a market. If you're my brother-in-law creates an enormous amount of crops in his backyard. He hasn't got any. There's no way in the world he can eat all the broccoli he produces. If we need to make it easier for people to be able to sell their broccoli in the open market at things like farmers markets in a cooperative way. But the biggest issue, I think, is water. We have just begun to create a purple pipe network. That's the use of reclaimed water, treated wastewater, which can be used for irrigation. Can't drink it, but you can use it for irrigation. It's much cheaper. It's better for the environment. And I'll have more to say about that in a minute, I suspect.
Well, this is the kind of information that Austinites need to make good decisions when voting for city council members. If you're just now tuning in, you're watching the 2012 Green Forum for the Austin City Council candidates. And we're on channel Austin 10 and streaming online at channelaustin.org.
Let's look now at composting and zero waste. You will have 2 minutes to respond, and we will begin with Mr. Duffy. Councilmember Spellman says that he has concerns about how we, practically speaking, will divert food waste in multifamily complexes, especially space-constrained high-rises downtown. Composting is part of our zero waste plan, and all San Franciscans, for example, already have composting bins. How will you ensure that all Austinites have responsible opportunities to deal with their food waste?
I mean, right now I have one of those 3-tiered compost bins in my backyard, and I pretty much don't throw out anything. I can pretty much recycle or compost almost anything I use. But I can see the challenge when you live in an apartment complex with where you're going to take that. You don't have a backyard to sort of work it in, and then there's also issues of vermin, rats, raccoons getting into it, that sort of thing. Not that I consider a raccoon vermin, but they're very cute. You basically have to have a place that is central to the place where people live. Not central to downtown, but nearby where they live, where they can take this. Now, you can your options are collection and having a collection service like you have recycling and trash, or it's going to be something where people have to deliver it themselves. And I think if people start having to deliver it themselves, they're going to be very resistant to it, because it's another thing to have to do. And compost can be messy and stinky and that sort of thing. So, I mean, in creating spaces where we can grow food, we should also be creating places where we can deposit waste. And we already have trucks coming by to pick up yard waste. We already have trucks coming by to pick up, logs and, those bags people buy from Walmart to put their grass in and send away from their house. So, I mean, it doesn't seem infeasible that the same truck could be picking up banana peels and eggshells and all that.
Hi, Councilmember. How would you ensure responsible food waste disposal?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what happens to food waste, what's an appropriate thing to do with food waste, and I think there's a lot of difficulty that people have to get over. There are basically 3 things you can do with food waste. You can put it down the trash, which ends up in the landfill, turns into methane gas, and is bad for everybody. You can put it down the sink, which, so long as it's not fats, oils, and greases, probably won't clog up the drain, but it's not the best thing to do with it. Eventually, we can recycle it, we can turn it into gas, and we can use it as compost when it gets down to the wastewater treatment plant. But it might get clogged up along the way if somebody else puts in foods of fats, oils, and greases down the sink, and it's not the most efficient way to deal with it. What we really want people to do is compost it. But particularly if you're dealing with an apartment building or a high-rise apartment building, it's hard for people to get used to the idea of taking all of their food waste and putting it in a little can, waiting for somebody to come by and pick it up, because then it's sitting in the kitchen, it's going to smell bad. What happens if a rat finds out? So at my suggestion, the Resource Recovery Department is mounting a formal experiment of apartment buildings in Austin, where we're going to give people a bunch of different choices as to how they can deal with their composting. Put it in the kitchen, take it to a central location. We're particularly experimenting with the idea of putting it in a central location, which will then be picked up and used at a particular community garden. The idea here is that if people know that their food waste is going to be used in a particular place for a particular purpose, and perhaps they can eat the food which is used at the place which is doing the composting, then that personal connection to the place might actually cause them to compost more. So there's a bunch of ways we can do it. We have to work through a bunch of different possibilities. But composting is clearly the best thing to do with the food waste, and we just have to get over people's initial barriers to help them do the right thing.
Thank you. Mr. Prudente, what would you do to ensure responsible food waste disposal?
Where I came from, we gave it to the chickens and hogs. But, well, I'm not there anymore. I'm in the big city now. Let's look at the recycling when it started. versus now. You don't see a lot of people recycling. Look in the garbage cans as you drive by. There's all kinds of stuff in the garbage going to the landfill. Now, how are we going to make this idea active in the line of recycling food waste when the idea of recycling other stuff is not working 100%? So now then you got a big apartment project or high-rise. You might have maybe 1,000 people, whatever, that's responsible for their food waste. What percentage of these people are actually going to follow this plan? There's a plan of education that needs to be brought forward, and then there has to be people that will follow this plan. So between those two, making the plan and people following it, we'll have to see how it works out.
Okay. Question number 4 is your opportunity to expand on these topics. And again, the response time is 2 minutes. We'll start with Councilmember Spellman. What environmental issue did we not ask you about in the questionnaire that you think is important and want to take leadership on with the city?
You haven't asked specifically about sprawl, and let me talk about that for a minute. The numbers differ depending on who you're talking to and how long a time frame they give, but we're talking about a minimum of 500,000 people coming to Austin metropolitan area in the foreseeable future. They're going to have to find some place to live. If the city doesn't do anything in particular, then the easiest place for the development community to meet their needs is by building in Manor and Buda and points further east. In Greenfields, where we're taking away farmland and, just as important, increasing people's need to drive, putting them into cars, longer, more vehicle miles traveled, more people on our highways, and more traffic congestion, which is going to be messing with the quality of life for all of us who have chosen to stay in town and may even live close to our workplace. What we need to do is to give people choices for living inside the city, but we need to do this in such a way that we're not actually destroying or even much inhibiting the quality of life in the urban neighborhoods that we live in. I think the way to do that is going to differ very much from one neighborhood to the next. In Rosedale, for example, they don't like granny flats or garage apartments. But in Hyde Park, where I live, granny flats or garage apartments are a perfectly acceptable part of the community. We'll have to make a different decision on that kind of a product. We'll have to talk about different means of doing multifamily housing, different ways of working up duplexes so that they're invisible, which is something that they've been doing in Vancouver, British Columbia for a long time, is making duplexes look just like regular houses. You can't tell the difference between a single-family house and a duplex. We're going to have to come up with a different accommodation to increasing density from one neighborhood to the next. But the experience of other cities that have attempted to do this shows that there is a way of working that out. We're going to have a different accommodation in each neighborhood, but we're going to have an accommodation. We'll be able to incorporate a large number of those 500,000 people into our town.
Okay. And Mr. Prudente, what environmental issue did we not ask you about in the questionnaire that you think is important and that you want to take leadership on with the city?
Well, you did ask about air pollution, but wasn't my idea of some air pollution. There is EPA on automobiles that if the smoke, the emissions hang in the air for longer than 10 seconds, it should be reported. Now, this is air pollution, and I don't remember anything on this questionnaire that regarded vehicle exhaust. I put it on there about vehicle exhaust as being one of our #1 problems of air pollution. Now, there are vehicles running around, not a lot, but you see them occasionally, that have smoke coming out of the tailpipe that lingers in the air. Diesels, some of these trucks that are coming through here are still blowing black smoke. We have a lot of problems with these vehicle exhaust. These vehicles need to be taken off the road. People need to understand that there is a phone number you can call and report these vehicles for air pollution. The EPA will do something about it.
Okay, and Mr. Duffy, what environmental issue did we not ask you about in the questionnaire that you think is important and want to take leadership on with the city?
I'm going to do some that are kind of quasi-connected. One thing that's never really talked about is what we even consider a house. And there are so many living options and so many building materials that are just never even considered when we talk about development or building houses. The standard sort of McMansion using lumber from a faraway forest that's treated with formaldehyde and other chemicals, and you build these houses that need massive repair after 20 or 30 years are not sustainable, but we consider this a house and we consider this development. But we never think about things like cob, straw bale, rammed earth, or other, technologies that are completely 100% sustainable, biodegradable, and people have been using for centuries. They also require less utilities. A cob house doesn't need as much energy to heat or to cool. And I really think if we start looking at making buildings out of actual natural materials, we can save people money, hence affordability as far as people moving into a home, and also make a more sustainable city. But then also the idea of just growth in general being a necessity. We talk about this idea of sustainability, but we never address what that word even means. It means being able to do something indefinitely. And when we look at trucks bringing in all of our food and our clothes and coal, keeping our energy going and keeping our semi-arid life cool in a 110-degree day in the summer, we are absolutely not sustainable. The way we use the word is a joke. And, when we use bond packages to fund our city, we're predicating ourselves on growth, on more every year. And we might not see the forests getting chopped down here. We might not see the rivers getting dammed here. We may not see the species going extinct here or the people being pushed off their land, but it's happening somewhere around the world to facilitate us expanding. And we have to look at that.
All right, we've been efficient with our use of time, and we have time for one more question. So we'll start with Mr. Prudente. When it comes to energy, Mr. Duffy says he thinks conservation is the biggest thing we need to focus on. With Austin's population exploding and concerns about environmental impacts of coal, natural gas, nuclear power, and the cost of renewables, conservation seems to offer the most bang for our energy buck. What new policies do you support to further conserve energy in Austin? And each of you will have 1 minute to answer.
Well, when you go to conserve, there are some people that's already conserving, like fixed income retired people, for instance. And now they can't conserve any more than what they're already conserving. Their rates are going up, by the way. Coal, we're getting away from coal. We're getting away from fossil. I don't like nuclear. That's a bad thing. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us with solar and wind and MSW, as far as energy concerns. As far as conservation, yes, there are some people that have large families, they leave the lights on. They should turn the lights off when they leave the room. Turn your air conditioning down. Don't freeze yourself out because it feels good. No, we have to sacrifice somewhat in order to realize that what we are using is not coming free, and what's providing that we're running out of. So, yeah, I think conservation is a good thing overall, but they may have some drawbacks in some situations.
Mr. Duffy, what would you do to encourage conservation?
We live in a world that just doesn't encourage conservation at all. I mean, we tell people to go buy more stuff all the time. That's how we keep the economy going. Go buy more Apple. We're bringing Apple to town. Go buy your iPod and your iPad. Now charge it up, plug it in. I mean, we tell people one thing and then we tell them the exact opposite. This is insane. We tell this, we say growth is inevitable and good, and then we get mad when there's more traffic and more people on the road and rates go up because more people are using the same energy and water sources. This is insane. How can we encourage conservation? I think from a government standpoint, from a city government standpoint, the best thing they can do is typically with financial incentive. Now, you can offer, I've talked about exploring the idea of sort of voluntary dark hours, like for a business or a church or even a household, when they know they're not going to be in their home or in their business. They're closed on Sundays, have all the power shut off to the building, and get an incentive to do so. And then, I mean, you could do the best that you can that way, and then possibly start taking some money from instead of sending money from Austin Energy to the general fund, use that money to be putting towards decentralized solar so we can look towards a future of at least, the energy we do use being quasi-sustainable. But from a city government standpoint, it's almost impossible when you tell people to do one thing and then you suggest the exact opposite out of the other side of your mouth.
Mr. Spellman, what new policy ideas do you have to encourage conservation?
I'm not sure how new they are. but I've got a long list of ideas which I just scribbled down, and let me sort of run down the list. And some of these are new and some of these are really old. Some of these we talked about earlier today. The reason for doing conservation from an electric utility point of view is that it's the cheapest means of dealing with our need for electric powers and not have to need it in the first place. So insulation, weatherization of your house, more efficient appliances are cheaper means of solving people's problems than just by pumping more electrons into the house. We have an electric utility which has, up till now, gotten by selling electrons. The whole means of sustaining that electric utility is by selling electrons. And we have electric rates which are organized towards selling as many electrons as possible. What we're talking about is changing the electric rates so that there is going to be a cost associated with buying a lot of electrons that you can avoid by buying fewer. The rate is highest for the biggest houses that use the most electricity and will be considerably lower for smaller apartments or smaller houses or better insulated houses. So this is one of the things we're moving to, which is going to encourage people to use less electricity. But more generally, what we need to do is to encourage the people who are running that utility to find it in their best interest not to sell electrons only, but to find some other means of supporting the utility. There's a bunch of ways of doing that, but changing the electric rates so that they can be sure that they're going to be paid back for their conservation efforts. No matter how many electrons they sell, they're going to be able to make good on their conservation efforts is something which we are talking about doing, which we're going to be doing in a couple of months. Very quickly, in addition to rate design, we ought to talk about passive conservation. Where do you put your trees? We ought to encourage people to plant trees over their houses to reduce their need for air conditioning. We ought to talk about increased use of solar. The easiest way to do that. Oh, I got too many things to do. Roy, you can't shut me off now. Okay, it was a good question. I got a lot of stuff for you. I'll tell you all about it later.
Okay, good. Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, John Duffy, Bo Prudente, and Bill Spellman for joining us with this forum. This concludes our questions for candidates running for Place 5.